Hello and welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the Planning Commission. This day is Tuesday, January 26, 2021. This meeting is called to order. At this time, I'll request staff to call roll for commissioners who are present and not.
Sure. Commissioner Davidson,
Here.
Commissioner Lubomirsky,
Here.
Commissioner Mercado,
Here.
Commissioner Saudi,
Here.
Vice Chair Privatali,
Here.
Chair Samudzi.
I'm here.
And I just want to note that Commissioner Hill is not in attendance and may not join us tonight.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll move on to the order of the agenda. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda? If none, next we'll move on to the meeting procedures. Due to the COVID-19 shelter-in-place order, we have had to establish new ways of conducting our public meetings. I'd like to ask staff to address how public comment will work this evening.
Sure. So this meeting is being streamed live to YouTube, where viewers can provide comment in live chat by going to www.youtube.com/City of San Rafael or by phone at 669-900-9128 and entering the meeting ID, which is 897-5534-1830 and pound. In addition, we are now offering closed caption streaming of this meeting. The link to the closed captioning service can be found in the YouTube live chat. If you're participating by phone tonight and wish to provide comment, please press *9 when the chair opens up the public comment period. Once it's your turn to speak, you'll hear a notice that the host is inviting you to participate. At that point, you will press *6 to unmute yourself. Once you unmute yourself, you can go ahead and speak, and you will have 3 minutes to provide public comment. I'd also like to remind you to make sure your volume on any other device that you're watching, whether it's YouTube Live or some other device, that you turn that down so you don't get any feedback or audio delay. If you're submitting public comments on YouTube, please write public comment in capital letters before you begin your comment. Introduce yourself and submit your comments in groups, as there is a 200 character limit. Keep in mind that comments in the chat are also limited to 3 minutes worth of text. Comments will be read as submitted. However, I should note that words including profanity, obscenities, and discriminatory language that disturb the decorum of this meeting will not be read to the record. If you have submitted comments prior to the meeting by email or letter, they have been forwarded to the Planning Commission and they have been published to our website. And that's it.
All right, thank you, Ali. Let me now describe the meeting procedures. We will begin with a staff report. Then we will hear from the applicant. Applicant, please try to keep your presentation to no more than 10 minutes. Members of the public will then be invited to speak. We will read any comments that are made into the YouTube live chat, and people on the conference call can speak when they receive the notification that they have been unmuted. Please keep comments to 3 minutes. Commission will then have the opportunity to ask questions of staff, applicant, or public after each segment. We will close the public hearing and bring the matter back to the commission for discussion and action if necessary. Anyone with an urgent communication on a topic not on the agenda may address the commission at this time.
If there's anyone on the conference call or through Zoom that wishes to provide public comment on a topic not on the agenda, you may go ahead and press *9 on your phone or click participant tab and raise your hand through Zoom to virtually raise your hand. Once it's your turn, you'll hear a notification that the host is inviting you to participate. At that time, you will press *6 to unmute yourself. You'll be able to speak. I'd like to remind you to introduce yourself first, and you will be allotted 3 minutes to speak. Make sure you have the volume on any other device you're watching turned down so that you don't get feedback or audio delay. And while I'm waiting for participants to press *9, I'm going to go ahead and see if there's anything in chat, and I do not see anything. And I do not see any comments.
Okay, thanks again. All right, we're going to move now on to the consent calendar, which has one item, which is to review the minutes from our last Planning Commission on January 12th. We have one item, which is the approval of the Planning Commission meeting minutes of January 12th. Recommended action is approve as submitted. Are there any comments from the public on the consent calendar? And just to jog your memory, this was to review the downtown precise plan.
Again, if there's anyone in the conference call wishing to provide public comment on the consent item, which is the minutes of January 12th, if there is, you may go ahead and press *9 to virtually raise your hand. And once it's your turn to speak, you will hear a notification that the speaker is inviting you to participate. At that time, you can press *6 to unmute yourself, and you may introduce yourself. You'll be allotted 3 minutes to speak. Make sure you have all devices turned off so you don't get any feedback. And then while I wait to see if there's anybody interested in talking, I'm going to just check the chat. And I do not see anybody in the chat. And I do not see any raised hands, so there's no public comment at this time.
Awesome.
Move to approve the minutes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
And just to confirm, that was Commissioner Lugomirski with a second by Commissioner Davidson.
Yes.
All right. The chair now will ask staff to conduct a roll call.
Commissioner Davidson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lugomirski,
Yes.
Commissioner Mercado, Commissioner Mercado,
Yes.
Commissioner Saudi,
Same.
Vice Chair Privatali,
Yes.
and Chair Samudzi.
Yes.
And that was 1 abstention by Commissioner Saudi.
Got it. Thanks. We'll now move on to the item for public hearing and the discussion item. So the item for public hearing is a continuation of review of the draft downtown San Rafael precise plan. This is our second public hearing on this plan, covering the draft form-based code. The recommended action is to accept the report, provide comments, and continue hearing to February 9th for a wrap-up discussion. At this time, the chair will request a staff report.
Chair Samudzi, I don't have much else to add to last week's introduction. I'll go ahead and let Stefan go ahead and provide his presentation, and if there's any comments during or after the presentation, I'm happy to participate.
Thank you, Ali. Good evening, Chair Samudzi and members of the San Rafael Planning Commission, and to everyone who is listening this evening. I'm going to share my screen and share a presentation with you on the Downtown Precise Plan form-based code. Great. It's a pleasure to sort of be with you here again this evening. Tonight, I'm going to do sort of a very quick overview of some of the material that we discussed in our last meeting. And then I'm going to spend the bulk of my presentation this evening giving you an overview of Chapter 9 of the Downtown Precise Plan, which of course is the form-based code. So a little bit of background on sort of what we talked about before. The Downtown Precise Plan, of course, was initiated in early 2019. Throughout the year in 2019, we worked with stakeholders and community members to gather input and established a series of alternatives, which culminated in the fall of 2019 with a final downtown options report. We made some initial trips to the Planning Commission and City Council in the fall of 2019, which provided us guidance to begin putting together a draft plan and code in the spring of last year. The work that we presented to you yesterday, last time, and tonight is sort of a culmination of the finalization of that draft precise plan and code. So last time we had a chance to talk a little bit about the structure and organization of the code. The precise plan sets policies and standards which guide the city in prioritizing public investment and regulating private development. We discussed largely what's included in the yellow box here on the slide. The plan includes design principles, guiding policies, strategies, and implementing actions. And tonight we're going to talk about Chapter 9, which is the regulatory framework for the code that is intended to be used in the review and entitlement of projects within the downtown precise plan planning area. So we discussed last time the key themes that are reflected in the plan, and I won't go into these in detail again, but many of these sort of key items are funneled through directly to the code in terms of the regulations that are put forward to try to implement some of the goals and policies of the plan. And as I mentioned before, the precise plan is a 10-chapter document. And last time we had an opportunity to do an overview of chapters 1 through 8. And tonight we're going to talk specifically about Chapter 9. So Chapter 9 is actually organized into 4 articles, and I'm going to walk you through these this evening. Article 1 provides an introduction to the code. Article 2 provides development standards organized by downtown zone, and I'll walk you through those this evening. And then Article 3 includes additional standards in the form of supplemental standards that apply to those downtown zones. And there's 3 key components of that chapter. And then Article 4 provides definitions, use types, and measurement methods that can be used to interpret the standards in the code. The beginning of Chapter 9 provides this quick code guide, which is illustrated here. And these 10 steps sort of identify how the material in the chapter is intended to be used for the city in reviewing development applications, but also for applicants, developers, designers who are pursuing projects in the downtown area. This provides some guidance for how to use the code to actually put that project together. And I'll be talking about sort of each of these as we sort of go through the different sections of the code. But the code provides guidance for these elements. It provides zoning, it provides guidance for land uses, it provides guidance for the footprint of buildings and zoning envelope in terms of height and bulk. It provides standards for parking, guidance to articulate facades, and specific guidance for elements of facades, including frontage, signage, and supplemental standards that apply to sites such as screening, landscaping, and the design of parking lots. It also provides guidance for how applications can be processed in the downtown depending on their size and intensity. So the preamble in Division 2.1 provides an overview of the code, and a key feature of the form-based code is it utilizes what we would call the natural to urban transect as an organizing principle for the code framework. What's important to sort of remember about this is that this organizing transect provides a spectrum of intensity from more urban places at the more intense end of the spectrum to less urban or natural places on the opposite end. And this is used to sort of organize different elements to sort of describe how tall buildings should be, the intensity of the land uses and the land use mix that's appropriate for any location. It helps to describe decisions that are made with regards to the building's relationship to the street. Are they directly behind the sidewalk? Are they separated by a yard or other frontage? You can see these standards sort of reflected and sort of ripple through the organization of the development standards in the code. And those are reflected on the zoning map for downtown, which you can see here can be found in the code in Article 2 in Division 2.2. This regulating plan it intends to replace the existing zone standards in the downtown with 4 new zones that you can see described here: T4N, T4MS, T5N, and T5MS. And it also retains small sub areas of existing zones where the precise plan identifies that no change from the previous condition is intended to occur. So that includes the small residential neighborhood that's found on Latham Street in the West End, which retains the MR 2.5 designation, as well as the wetland overlay district that is found along portions of the creek to the south of the Biomarin development. So the regulating plan is an important first step in understanding what zones apply to any given site. It also provides information with regards to the historic resources that have been articulated within Chapter 5 of the precise plan. And you can see those here. Individual historic buildings have a darker black outline that are identified in Chapter 5, and potential historic districts that are identified in Chapter 5 are shown with a dark blue outline around those areas that are potentially eligible to be considered as historic districts. You can see that the most intense organization of zones is focused on the downtown gateway area in the immediate vicinity of the SMART station and the Center Falls Transit Center. The additional intensity along 4th Street as a central core from the downtown gateway to the downtown core area. The West End to the west retains much of the sort of smaller scaled character with a continuation of the mixed use pattern along 4th Street that is transitioning to a more sort of residential mixed use character in the neighborhoods to the north and south. And you can also see zones applied east of the highway to the Montecito area. And as I go through the code, I'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the intent of each of these zones and how the standards are used to implement that intent. A couple other things to note here. You can see that the zone districts provide descriptions that establish a base height for that zone, as well as the height of buildings that might be attained through a bonus system. This actually institutionalizes a bonus which can be provided for affordable housing projects to obtain between 10 and 20 feet, between 1 and 2 stories of additional development following the provisions of the code. This sort of follows existing standards that are found in the San Rafael Municipal Code today and carries them forth across the entire downtown precise plan area. This is a significant improvement that the heights have been sort of fully integrated into the development standards of the downtown districts. So this in Division 2.3 provides a useful overview of the 4 zones that are used in the downtown plan area. Again, these transition from less urban environments on the left of this slide to the most intense locations on the right. Here you can find information on zone intent, the intent of what the zones are attempting to create, and some sort of summary bullets with regards to their desired form. This sort of follows the description and the guidance that we found in the precise plan, particularly in chapter 4, and tries to sort of carry them through in the form of development standards. And then each of the zone districts has a primary set of standards that are found on a series of 6 pages in Division 2.3. This begins with a repeat of the zone intent and a description of any subzones that actually might be applicable to that zone. And then it provides guidance for how buildings are intended to be placed on parcels with regards to building placement standards, how encroachments might work with regards to encroachments to setbacks. And then the standards continue with guidance for the building form and the establishment of the zoning envelope. This provides guidance with regards to building heights and, if applicable, where step backs in the building form are required to occur at upper stories, as well as additional guidance for the zoning envelope. You can see here on the facing page how that is sort of graphically described. And here you see guidance on the right-hand page for building frontage. And I'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about the supplemental standards in the next division. But each zone district is calibrated with a series of allowed frontage types, which provide guidance for how that building in that zone is intended to transition interface with the streets, with the sidewalk and the street. And I'll talk about those a little bit more in detail. Each zone district also provides specific guidance for zone transitions, and this has to do with when we have cases where there are more intense zones, places where tall buildings with considerable bulk might be allowed that are immediately adjacent to zones of lesser intensity. And this both includes the zones that are on the periphery of the downtown precise plan area, which include some residential zones, as well as conditions internal to the downtown precise plan area where transitions to adjacent historic resources are important. And you can see here that this page references a subsequent section with regards to historic resources, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But this is intended to sort of make modulations to the zoning envelope to establish a more compatible form and minimize issues where there need to be transitions of scale between different zones in the downtown precise plan area. The development standards also provide guidance for parking. Some key things to note is that the parking standards proposed in the code are generally less than what parking standards are provided in the existing downtown zones. Where possible, we've attempted to modernize and optimize these standards. Many of these carry over recommendations from the downtown parking and wayfinding study that was completed many years ago. We also are trying to accommodate provisions and recommendations to expand the downtown parking district, which would allow additional flexibility to how, in particular, non-residential uses at the ground floor might be parked, depending on their location within the downtown. Division 2.3 also provides guidance for land uses. This updates considerably the existing set of allowed land uses in the downtown zones today. It calibrates them across the transect zones, for the most part carrying forward the levels of review that the city requires for these zones in their given condition. So you'll see that some uses are permitted, some uses actually may require an administrative permit, and some uses might require discretionary review, either from the zoning administrator or from the planning commission, depending on their category and their location. A general sort of statement about land uses here is that this paints the entire downtown area within the transect zones in different shades of mixed use. And it particularly brings the potential for residential mixed use buildings to a greater degree than they were in under sort of the existing zoning guidance. And this is in part to promote this idea of new housing downtown following the guidance that the plan describes in chapter 4. The next division, 3.1 in Article 3, provides guidance for site standards. This includes guidance for elements like screening and fencing, as well as landscaping and a site design that can be applicable to site elements such as parking lots. It also provides guidance for things like bicycle parking and other elements that are applicable to all the zones. And then division 3.2 provides more specific guidance for the architecture of buildings within the downtown precise plan area. And this is described in terms of massing and articulation. This section does not provide specific guidance for architectural style, but what it does do in particular is try to carry forward design elements that were identified and discussed in the good design guidelines for downtown process and resulting document that was produced a few years back. And what this intends to do is ensure that new buildings within the downtown area are both compatible with the existing scale and form, can function well with the palette of those sort of historic buildings in the downtown, as well as sort of more modern structures, and generally promote good design to emerge within new infill buildings in the downtown area. So this section provides guidance for facade articulation, the composition of buildings into structural bays. It provides guidance for special elements with regards to roof forms and towers at corners that are intended to be interpretable through a wide variety of architectural styles and responses. Division 3.2 also provides additional detail and information with regards to buildings that relate to historic resources. And this includes buildings that are adjacent to identified historic resources in the plan. And it describes strategies for 2 different scales of those adjacencies that you can see on the left of this slide. It also provides specific guidance for situations where applicants are seeking to make additions to existing historic resources, adding on additional floors, for example, increasing the floor area of or building additions on existing historic resources, again, of different scales that provide a guidance for different conditions and situations that are found in the plan. These standards are intended to work closely with the guidance in chapter 5. And these are applicable following the guidance that is established in chapter 5 for adjacency to historic resources or alterations to actual historic resources. The supplemental standards, division 3.3, as I mentioned, also provide guidance for frontage. This is detailed guidance for how buildings can relate to and transition from the street edge or the back of the sidewalk to the front face of the building. And this includes more public conditions that you might imagine on 4th Street and other places where we would expect storefronts and a real urban transition into buildings, as well as some of the more sort of neighborhood character places where there is a broader range of frontage that actually might be expected, and small front yards and other transition strategies might be present. Each building or each application is generally required to provide at least one frontage type in their application, but these standards actually provide a lot of flexibility with regards to how buildings might be able to meet the street even within the confines of an individual parcel. And then in division 4.1, we have information with regards to definitions and measurements. I mentioned this a little bit in our last meeting. There are some new definitions that the code uses situations where we could not rely on the glossary that the Center for All Municipal Code provides. And so those are added here to help with interpretation. And there are also key components that are intended to guide the interpretation of the standards with regards to methods and measurements. So this includes guidance for things like facade zones, build to lines, new elements that the code introduces that can provide some background here. A lot of the content in this code, we had an opportunity to test it, and through some work that was done using existing applications in the downtown area. And what we did with these existing applications is we looked at those, we looked at buildings that had gone through the review and entitlement process in San Rafael, and we looked to understand how easily or how well they would meet the standards that are described in the code. And in particular situations where design changes would be warranted or merited, we wanted to understand what that would do to those applications. If there are situations where they could actually be improved upon by the application of these new standards, for example, or to what degree some of the buildings that the city sort of felt were really notable and well-designed would find compliance with this regulatory framework. This was a really useful activity for us. We were able to sort of identify some additional amendments that we are recommending and refinements to the code, particularly for sort of certain design elements. And we also, I think, sort of were able to demonstrate situations where the code could actually improve upon the design potential of these buildings, particularly with regards to their frontage, their sort of public face to the street, and their form and scale. So this again was sort of a very useful activity that we were able to do under the guidance of staff to make sure that the code was going to work for future infill applications in the downtown area. So with that, that concludes my overview of Chapter 9, and I look forward to your questions and comments on the content.
Commissioners or Chair Samudzi, one thing that I wanted to add is that we did receive correspondence from a number of people regarding the form-based code. There are a number of interesting questions that have come up, some really great comments that we look forward to digging into and evaluating and providing you with more information at the next meeting where we will provide the wrap up. So I just wanted to let you know that. I know that there are people in the audience that may be interested in those comments, and others looking on the YouTube Live as well. So we will provide some response to those comments and provide, if need be, some recommended changes to the form-based code and the downtown precise plan.
Okay, you're referring to the email that was sent, I think early this afternoon?
Exactly, there were a couple of letters that were sent to forward it to you.
Okay, yeah, okay. Thanks for that. Any other comments to be aware of, or things to be aware of?
No, not that I can think of, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so at this time, we'll ask questions of staff or the consulting team to the commissioners here. Any questions?
Actually, I have a question just as a matter of protocol. I have comments that are also questions. Should I ask those now or wait for the discussion period?
Let's wait for the discussion period. So I'll reserve these initial questions just for clarification, and then if you have further comments, then we'll just get to the discussion.
Good, thank you.
Okay, hearing no further clarification questions, I'll open the public hearing and ask staff to open up the public comments.
Okay. If there is anyone in the conference call that wishes to provide public comment on this agenda item, please press *9 to virtually raise your hand. Once it's your turn, you're going to hear a notification that the host has invited you to participate. At that time, you'll press *6 to unmute yourself, and then you can go ahead and speak. Introduce yourself, and you'll be allotted 3 minutes to speak. But please make sure you have the volume on all other devices turned down so that you do not get any feedback or audio delay. And then while we're waiting for participants to raise hands, I'm just going to check the chat. I do not see anything there, and I do not see any raised hands. Just checking again. I do not see anyone wishing to provide comment.
Okay. Then at this point, I will close public hearing. And at this point, we'll open it up to comments or questions. So Vice Chair Previtali, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I have just a few overarching questions and comments and some very specific ones. Chair Samutzi, how would you like me to proceed? Do you want me to just provide all my questions and comments immediately in a line or should we take turns?
Well, let's maybe keep it as a back and forth. So just one question at a time, and just keep asking until anybody else jumps in or what have you.
Okay, sounds good. First of all, I really want to thank you, Stefan, and also Tony, for this incredible work. I've never read a plan like this, and I find it really an amazing piece of technology, really, and I'm looking forward to it being implemented. As I mentioned, I had some overarching questions. I'll start with the first one here, and that is, are there any special zoning requirements for buildings that are in the potential historic districts? Or should there be? Is there any need for that?
Thanks, Vice Chair Previtali. I can sort of quickly answer that question. There's two things happening within the potential historic districts. One is that there's a prevalence of individual historic resources, and those particular buildings, if they, for the most part, are receiving policy direction to be preserved, to sort of avoid the sort of demolition and redevelopment of those individual parcels. So the plan actually provides guidance specifically for those parcels that would be improved through some sort of addition or sort of expansion of an existing building. You could imagine, for example, like let's say a one or two story historic building that could fit an additional floor on the third floor, sort of above an existing building, or an old house that might be lifted and have another floor sort of inserted underneath. So the first layer is that the plan provides some guidance for those historic structures. The second one is that the district is intended to function like a resource. And so within those blue boundaries, the plan assumes that we are treating all of the parcels within that boundary as if they are adjacent or have an adjacency to a historic resource. And in those situations, there are some provisions in Division 3.2 that provide guidance for what can happen if a brand new building would go in inside that district, even in order for it to meet those standards for adjacencies. And what we generally want to have in this situation is a smooth transition between new buildings and historic buildings. Sort of speaking, sort of very broadly. We don't want to have situations where we have a one-story historic building, and then we have a big, 7-story brand new building that sort of goes in right next to it. And so Division 3.2 provides some additional guidance for how those transitions between buildings can occur. Hopefully that helps clarify and answers your question, Vice Chair.
Yeah, it sounds good. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we'd like to see those eventually be designated as historic districts. I think that would be incredibly valuable, and it sounds like there's a good pathway to protect the character of those districts. Okay, my next question, also I noticed that Mitali Ganguly is also from Optica, so thank you as well for your work on this, and also to your entire team. It's very impressive. My next overarching question is about 3 characteristics that I think would be incredibly valuable downtown, and I think that these are pretty common in downtown areas. They're trees, public art, and also courtyards and public spaces. And I was wondering, and I think this may be sort of in the category of the site standards in 3.1. I was wondering if there are any, I didn't see any special requirements for those things, unless I missed them. I was wondering if there are requirements for those, perhaps in another body of code, how that's being handled.
Thanks, Vice Chair. Yeah, I can talk specifically sort of about those 3 things. The most of the guidance for trees with regards to street trees that would be happening within the public realm is found in the transportation and parking chapter of the downtown precise plan, and the guidance in particular that the recommended cross sections actually provide. What we have here internal to the downtown precise plan area and the development of private lots would be guidance with regards to those supplemental site standards that are providing some landscaping requirements for green space and parking lots within the downtown area. There's another layer there that I actually want to reference the specific section, is that each of the zone districts have a provision for let's see if I can find this. It's referred to in the code as a civic space requirement. And that it actually means that individual buildings that are proposed on parcels, depending on the size and intensity of that application, are actually required to establish 1 or more civic spaces on the site as part of the project. And the intention there is to generally create publicly accessible private open spaces at the ground plane that can be useful amenities for the downtown users. Those could come in the form of pocket parks or pocket plazas. They could come in the form of forecourts or courtyards to buildings. And the guidance in the code, this is specifically, and you can see that in subsection C, building placement under civic space of each of the zone districts. It generally falls on page 2 of the standards, and that is an area requirement that is established based on the size and intensity of the proposed project. And then the last thing I want to say is that there's not specific guidance for public art requirements in the code, but that is certainly something that could be considered.
I like to, oh, let me piggyback on that comment because I do remember when we heard that project, the apartment building on 2nd, 3rd, and is it the one close to the freeway? I forget the kitty corner from Soul Food Restaurant.
Camel Pies?
703 3rd Street, is that the large
Yes,
project?
yes. There was a discussion point how to screen one of the sides, and public art came up. I don't know if you guys remember. And we were asking as commissioners, can we sort of impose a requirement that they allow that space to be used to display local artist works as a way of screening just an ugly wall? And I don't really, I think the answer was no, we can't impose that because it's in essence asking them to work with a third party, which would be in the arts. And that's an interesting comment from Commissioner Prevatelli, because I would like to have that as an option, but I just don't see how we can fit that in, or is this the forum?
Yeah, if I can just respond to that. I mean, that is something that has been a topic lately about, how to incorporate public art in the review process, but also provide opportunities for public art, either on public property or in private spaces. And like Stefan was saying, that if that is something that's of interest to the commission, that's something we can explore a little bit more before we come back for the wrap-up session. But this is public art. Having public arts programs or public arts requirements is something that's used in other jurisdictions within Marin County and in the Bay Area, and actually throughout the nation. So it is something that local jurisdictions do adopt as a, one of the requirements, alternatives to maybe the civic space or contributing to the civic space or some other, form of just providing that extra community benefit.
And Allie, I actually have a follow-up question on that. Is there a percentage of construction cost requirement, or how is art requirement fulfilled in other jurisdictions in Marin that you know? Or are you aware of this?
Yeah, typically it's through providing a percentage of the building permit requirement, whatever the building permit fee is. And the applicant is required to contribute the art piece or contribute to a fund that then would be used by the entity, by the city of Santa Fe, to provide, kind of an opportunity for local artists to provide that art piece within a public space, for example.
That's great.
And the other thing I wanted to mention is you bring up a good point. Downtown Santa Fe has been recognized as a cultural arts district. And so definitely something for us to think about when we come back.
Great.
Hey, really quick, can you guys hear me? This is Commissioner Mercado. Okay, sorry, I have my video off just because my internet's so spotty. But I think the art installation is really interesting. I would just highlight, I don't think I've seen it in the general plan or in this precise plan as to that being a priority. So to the extent that you could condition, and look at that, Barry jumps right in. To the extent you could condition that on certain projects, I think there is authority, but I would happily get gut checked if there is a priority statement in our general plan on that.
If I can respond, there is. It's in the arts and culture element. You will find some action programs that deal specifically with public art and encouraging and improving public art. I also want to point out that in the Downtown Precise Plan, when we are talking about height bonuses, affordable housing is the obvious way to get a height bonus, but we've also made allowances to get height bonuses by providing major art installations or public spaces that go beyond the minimum that's required. So there are some incentives, height incentives for creating more art and more public space in the downtown area specifically.
I had one question about it has to do with sort of the relationship between new building and historic buildings, and how some of those like lot adjustments will differ. And I'm kind of curious about um, how is that space reclaimed in the event that a historic building, let's say, is destroyed and the owner decides not to rebuild? Um, or, I mean, there may be some other scenarios in which, this historic building either loses its historic status or something happens. Um, how do we handle or manage that space?
Stefan, do you want me to?
Yeah, sorry, I misplaced my mute button. I could start, maybe, and Allie, you could sort of piggyback, but if I understand your question correctly, Chair Samuzzi, the historic resources within the downtown area is the precise plan has worked to sort of greatly sort of clarify what is a historic resource and not a historic resource, greatly just depending largely on the supplemental survey work that's been done through the process. But those resources are always evolving, and that increased clarity is not going to sort of preclude problems of interpretation in the future. There are many projects, particularly that in the future that will relate to historic resources or occur within historic districts where the guidance of a historic preservation professional will be required to help interpret the applicability of what the applicant wants to do to that historic resource. And so Chapter 5 sort of provides some guidance for how that can be done and what sort of kind of levels are for where that should be triggered, where that additional review might be required to help make a decision about how historic resources should be impacted. And sometimes, that's going to go all the way to sort of additional CEQA review. And then I will say that, as a policy, the plan does describe that transfer of development rights is a strategy that can be used particularly in situations where historic resources might be constrained from achieving their full zoning envelope. There might be other ways that those development rights could be transferred to another site, which can help to preserve that historic resources in that location. And there's some cities that are sort of very good at that. There are provisions in the municipal code for TDRs that are sort of long-standing, but it is yet to be seen, I think, sort of how effective something like that could be used in the downtown planning area moving forward.
So could you kind of explain a little bit more about the transfer of development rights, how that would work?
Yeah, and essentially what that would do is, let's say there is a two-story building in the downtown area that is a high-quality historic resource, but it's in part of the downtown plan where you could actually do a 7 or even 8-story building with the bonus, and that puts significant pressure on that building to remove it or demolish it so that the full sort of development envelope can be achieved. And what a TDR would do is it would enable a process where the value that's in those unbuilt floors could be transferred and sold to another site, a site that actually could benefit from building additional floors that could sort of help to preserve that historic building, intact. There's a lot of nuance there. The plan provides guidance for us to say, well, you can add on to a historic building, but you shouldn't really be adding on the full extent of the allowed zoning envelope. So maybe the TDR becomes a compromise, or it's used to sort of take that excess building envelope. What's usually challenging with that is finding an appropriate receiver site,
Mhm.
because that does create a situation where, you know, there may be impacts of that other site that suddenly need to be considered, because they actually might be able to build taller than what the zoning envelope and the precise plan describe,
Mhm.
when they actually would be purchasing those rights. But these are techniques that sort of particularly older cities, cities that are dealing with really high intensity development,
Mhm.
do all the time.
Yeah.
You know, sort of the purchasing of air rights, and it is usually driven by the fact that there is a value
Yeah.
in purchasing those rights and applying them somewhere else. And that again is, I think, where you can say that the TDR mechanism in downtown San Rafael has not really been used to date, with effectiveness in this way, but it certainly should be a useful mechanism moving forward.
So then in your advice here and what's laid out here, the suggestion is no sort of hard prescription, but rather it's, I guess, a strong encouragement of getting the right experts to help advise through this process.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, chapter 5 with regards to the historic resources, it tries to provide sort of those clear choices. It provides some guidance for what to do when you actually have a resource and you're altering it or building an addition, and then what to do when you're adjacent to a resource. And that's sort of the guidance that we would sort of look to. It's done within the framework that the Secretary of Interior establishes for the rehabilitation and the preservation of historic resources, and that, you know, we can say that that sort of passes the CEQA test, for what we need to do. I think ultimately we want to find a balance where we recognize the historic resources in downtown Santa Fe are unique and a huge contributor to the you know the culture and the character of the place. And we want to be able to sort of preserve that moving forward, but we also want to make sure that downtown can not be frozen and can continue to reinvest and be a place where infill can occur. And so the plan sort of tries to kind of strike the balance between those two poles.
Thank you. I haven't spoken yet, but I want to thank you all at Opticos for putting this together. It's a lot of material. I'd say I've gone deeper in parts of it and not as deep in others. But regarding the historic resources, and professionally, I've gone in front of SHPO and NPS and historic boards at, you know, cities across the United States, and I've seen like a very wide range of how the national standards have been interpreted, and, you know, anywhere from, and they are so, you know, there seem to be very like bullet point guidelines that leave a lot of room for interpretation. So what it does is it allows people like us, or if we had a historic board in San Rafael that was reviewing these applications, it would allow them a lot of leeway to use their judgment. And what I find is that what I've seen across the country, and I'm sure you have professionally, is really like forward-thinking jurisdictions allowing those interpretations to provide really creative ways of interpreting those guidelines, and allowing like the new architecture that may be like completely juxtaposing, like if there was an addition, you know, like the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, great example. You know, there's examples here in San Francisco, especially along the Embarcadero and stuff, that have like enhanced historic resources and allowed the rehab to happen within the building, and then brought, you know, basically given money to rehab existing buildings and then add to them creatively. But like, you know, in the scale of San Rafael, there's not a lot of opportunity to do that. But, you know, one project that really comes to mind is the library. And I know I don't know where we are on the library. Allie might know more about that. I know there was a survey that was the last I heard of it, and that we may or may, I don't know if we have a site yet. But I love our current library. I love you know, the tree in front of it and the setting and its adjacency. I mean, it sounds like very nostalgic, but I love the adjacency to, you know, City Hall and the other buildings that are there, and just, you know, the pedestrian aspect of where it's located. I don't think that pedestrian access is lost down on B Street, but what I know that there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of restrictions on that site, and I think a lot of them tie to like Chapter 5. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the library and how the context of this plan would inform that. And it's not like a very clear question, but I guess it would be good to hear how you think that would impact, you know, preserving the location of our library and allowing us to modernize and add to it to keep it where it is.
I can give you just a little bit of background on that. We do have, when we have a historic resource, there's more than just that resource and its architecture that is important. The setting of that resource is also important. And so just, you know, thinking about like how the adjacency standards apply to the buildings that are next to historic resources. And one of the reasons is that you can impact that resource by development of buildings adjacent to these resources. I'm not sure I'm not as familiar with the library project as I should be, but we can certainly look into that and come back and speak to that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, one of the questions that was asked is what happens if a resource goes away, if it's destroyed? And I believe, and Stefan, correct me if I'm wrong, the adjacency standards apply to structures that are located just adjacent to historic resources. If for some reason that building is destroyed, then it no longer exists, and the standards would no longer apply to that property. So I think, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Stefan.
That's generally correct, Ali, and that, you know, that there are a lot of layers there, you know, and there is sort of policy and guidance to make sure that those historic resources are preserved. But yes, the adjacency condition could be in flux as the quality and the character of the historic resources changes over time.
I'll jump in, I guess. Barry and your team, a great document, great long, arduous journey, but I think the end product is solid, and it'll help us into the future. And Paul and Ali, I'm sure the city had a large hand in it, so kudos to all you guys for working on this. I know it's not the end, but it's probably not looking at it again in quite much detail after this. My big concern is the height, and I think it's just, I picture the French Quarter, the office building on Irwin and 2nd and 3rd. It's kind of, there's always different tenants. I guess it's a real estate now, but if all those places become apartments or condos with housing, with bonuses, that'd be 100 foot on both sides of the freeway. And you would end up, it'd be like some sci-fi kind of movie going through with 100-foot buildings on both sides of you. And I think that would be utterly ridiculous. I mean, I drive through Emeryville and I think these people are crazy to put these buildings so close to the water and so disproportional to the landscape. And I feel the same way about this, the allowing the bonuses, if they're built out. I mean, you know, yes, there need to be more housing, but I think it's crazy to put, you know, 20 feet on top of 80 feet or 70 feet. I think that's just utterly ridiculous for San Rafael. So that's you know, my main concern is that I just, I would love to see a rendering of all the spaces on both sides of Highway 101 built out to what they could be. And some people think they should be. Looking at the letters we got recently, higher. So I think it's utterly ridiculous. The second thing is library. I guess they're talking about library at Albert Park, which again, another terrible idea. It's nice to have space. How about a library in the parking lot to the east side of where the the police department was, or the city building is now, there's probably plenty of space that's just parking lot right now. So between the building now and the curb on the east side of the city hall now, or the area between City Hall and the Elks Club would be a great spot for a library. But I think to move it away from the downtown core, to move it into Alberts Park would just be, I don't know. I mean, I think it wouldn't be a big relation. And the last thing, because I can multitask as a teacher, I can share with you, I don't know if it's public knowledge, but we have one fewer commissioner now. We went from commissioner to council member. So Eli Hill was picked up. He got demoted to city council. So we'll have to be looking for someone else. I don't know if that's good or bad news. I guess he wanted it, so I'm happy for you, Eli.
Oh, that's awesome.
But there you go. Anyway, so that's all. I just would that, Barry? I mean, it's crazy. Would that be possible if just for fun, shits and giggles, build out the corridor on both sides of 101 at 100-foot buildings, just to give you an idea of how ridiculous that would be? I can ask you because you can say no, but
you know, I might be a dissenter, but that might be a cool concept for like a skywalk over the highway.
no lie. No, let's do it. Let's have it like a sky garden across 101.
I mean, I don't know. And we
Can
could
it be a car dealership skyway?
Yeah. Well, no, Stefan, you had a thing of one of the three densities. You had the smart train and a 7-story, looked like setback, maybe 8-story building. I mean, you just flip that on both sides and put the freeway down the middle, and you'd have it. I mean, if this has been visualized, I visualize it, and I think it would be utterly. You'd be driving down the freeway, going through Santa Fe, and suddenly it'd be a corridor of buildings on both sides of you, which just to me seems utterly ridiculous. Anyway, that's all. I'm done venting.
Commissioner Lubomirsky, if I can reply. So there are some illustrative drawings in the downtown precise plan that show something like that perspective. And I think the important point is that not every one of those sites is going to redevelop. Some of them have historic buildings and therefore they won't redevelop, and the sites around them would not redevelop as intensely as those 70-foot height limits may imply. We've tried to identify what we think are the key development opportunities, and there are maybe 4 or 5 sites along that corridor that may have the opportunity to develop somewhere near that maximum, but I don't think you would see a wall of 70 or 80 or 90-foot tall buildings along the corridor in the manner that you're describing. I think it would be a building here, another building there, and they would be layered and varied and not a wall.
But they could be. I mean, with the plan we're laying out now, they could be there. I mean, legally, and you said 70-foot. Isn't when they get a 20-foot bonus? That's 90-foot if they wanted to do that.
They'd be eligible for a 20-foot bonus, but they'd also have to step down around any of those historic resources. For instance, on Fifth Avenue, there are historic homes. There are homes east of the freeway. So I mean, Stefan may want to reply to this as well, but I think it would be more varied. But your point is well taken. I understand that those are taller heights. I mean, I do want to also say that the existing heights in that area are not that different from what we're showing on the map, the existing allowable heights.
Well, I voted against the one that's going in on Lincoln in 2nd and 3rd. So I guess, at least if nothing else, I'm consistent. Anyway, but Barry, thank you. It's a really great document. And I think, again, it'll serve the city for easily the next 20 years, maybe more. Who knows what a general plan will look like in 2040. So thank you.
I just want to add that these are high, what's the word? The state limits our ability to stop developers from getting those height bonuses, right? We have no way of stopping that per se.
Couldn't we start at 40 feet? I know it's crazy, but if it was 40 feet, you add 20 on 40. Now they're building 60, I mean, I don't know.
You actually have a hard time doing that because of there's SB 330, which limits your ability to reduce heights from where they are now if it could impact housing. So you would not really be able to lower heights below, but very much below what they are currently. To Commissioner Davidson's point, in AB 1763 would provide an automatic 33-foot height bonus on any project that is 100% affordable above the base height. So, and that's within 1/2 mile of the transit center and the smart station. So we would be limited in within that 1/2 mile circle if a project that was 100% affordable came in and requested that height bonus. That's state law.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that. I think that's the critical issue to Commissioner LaMercy's concern. The height gains and the changes that are happening. I mean, my feeling is that this is either we implement these kind of plans that structure what authority we have to impose, design certain restrictions, but the state is slowly taking away control from any local jurisdiction. And so the way I see it is that's not happening less in the future, that's going to happen more. So I really like this general plan. I like this precise plan right here. I just think we have to be mindful that a lot of this may be continually impacted. So I know, Barry, you've always highlighted the ongoing requirement of checking in. I think that's going to be so critical on this because Sacramento is going to continue to impose more legislation that's going to require us to not go higher than figure something else out to build more housing. So I think it's a really interesting balance on the two, and unfortunately cities are losing control. So where that leaves us, I don't know, but I think this is a great start. My question, and I forget if this came up earlier, is what was the impetus for going to a form-based code? I don't remember if that came up in sort of the initial conversations.
Yeah, Ali, do you want to reply to that? I don't know if Paul is on. He may want to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think the one of the primary reasons was providing opportunity for additional densities. We have, a situation where we have properties that are located near the transit center, and we were able to get grant funding for looking at ways to make it easier for residential development. Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, we when we started the whole process of doing a precise plan or specific plan for downtown, we had always had the intent of folding in a form-based code, primarily because it helps with process. It adds a level of certainty to form and mass that we don't have in our current process. And so this tool has been used elsewhere in other similar communities where you have a downtown with an urban condition like this that has actually worked quite successfully. So really that was a desire to go in this direction early on.
Got it.
Please.
Thank you.
Actually, it's a good segue to another question I had, if that's okay, Chair Sambitsi. Okay. Yeah, my overarching question was, are there some cities that we may be familiar with who have used this type of form-based plan, and possibly specifically this form-based plan? They have gone through Opticus.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Vitale. The downtown Redwood City precise plan, I think, was really a shared exemplar by both city staff as well as the design team at Opticos. And Redwood City has been fairly successful in encouraging infill development in their downtown, doing a lot of revitalization at a fairly significant scale. And so I think that is a good model. We've been working with the city of Richmond for many years that has applied a form-based code to their downtown, and They are now just starting to see projects emerge in and around the BART station that are sort of a result of that FBC. There are sort of other notable projects in the Bay Area. The Pleasant Hill BART TOD is sort of a 12-year project that it has been using a form-based code for build out of that project. It's really sort of an exemplary infill mixed-use development, as well as the city of Hercules, which had no downtown up until around 2000. It's been using a form-based code to build out a downtown area for about 20 years. And downtown Petaluma is a sort of another example. It's been doing form-based infill development now for about 22 years. And really with a lot of sort of really positive outcomes. So I think we definitely looked at many of those exemplars. I would say what Sarenfell has is actually fairly unique, in part because the pattern of small lots and being able to create a regulatory framework that is going to be good for that pattern was something that not all cities share. The overlay of the historic resources and being able to sort of work with those was also a fairly unique accomplishment of this plan. And so I'm hopeful, based on what we've learned through the testing process, that this is going to be an effective regulatory tool for the downtown area.
Great. And just one follow-on question. I know that there's a lot of interest in converting a portion of 4th Street to a walking mall. And I know that also the concept of outdoor rooms was really a focus in the plan, precise plan. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, Stefan, do you feel like the this form-based code is compatible with those goals? Is it supportive of those goals?
I believe so. You know, we had an opportunity to really talk at length about the role that 4th Street plays in the larger downtown area and sort of what it should look like in the future. And I think if the city determines to go in that direction with regards to the pedestrianization of 4th Street, that it's certainly compatible with sort of what the code provides. I think one of the things that we had a chance to talk about last time, which is sort of a key feature, is making sure that the streets are places that continue to get sun, that we sort of don't create a situation where we have canyons that are always in the shade, and I think particularly in the Bay Area, there's such a connection to how we use public spaces and how we access sunlight. And that's sort of a particular situation that we have, because in the mornings and afternoons, it tends to be colder in sort of our little microclimate. And so we sort of seek out the sun at those times when the sun is lower in the sky. So I would say that for the most part, the height provisions of the code are sort of built to accommodate and ensure sun access to the street, or sort of continue solar access to the street. And I think that that sort of is an important component of, that would be sort of an important first step to making those high quality pedestrian spaces in the future. And I would also say that, you know, there's such a tradition of street activity in Santa Fe that is accomplished through temporary closures. And that's a really fantastic foundation, I think, to build upon that other cities don't necessarily share, and that you sort of already have that in place.
Great. So I just wanted to find out from Chair Samutzi if it's okay if I switch gears and just ask some very specific questions about specific parts, as opposed to general questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, I guess let's start with the use cases, section 2.3.070, the table. I noticed that gun shops are, not permitted. They don't have a right, but are being considered. And I was wondering if there was any consideration of just simply banning gun shops.
No, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think most of the uses that were in the existing tables were transferred over, other than, just clarifying where there's some uses that, because of state regulations, we're no longer allowed to require use permits. And then in certain cases, a couple of cases, I think we, in order to address small businesses, we provided opportunities for permitted uses for, if it's less than a certain size. But no, the topic I don't think came up, Paul. I don't know if you had any discussions earlier on related to that.
No, I think you said it correctly. A lot of this is carryover from use allowances under our current zoning. And some of those use classifications are very old, and you will find that they are limited to certain areas, like, for example, the zoning districts along 2nd Street or 3rd Street, where we also have like secondhand stores or consignment stores, pawn shops. Those are some of those types of uses where there's been some concern about level of sensitivity or perhaps not being appropriate on 4th Street. I know that they were carried over in some of the 2nd Street area and the 3rd Street area. So that's probably why they appear here in the code. It's certainly something we can look at. We also have to keep in mind that there are certain existing uses that we want to make sure that we're not creating any undue hardship or nonconformities, but it's certainly something we can look at.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. And interestingly, I'm looking at the table right now, and I actually don't see it, but I think I saw it on Stefan's screen when you were showing that section. So maybe it's already been taken out. Anyway, I would certainly be in favor of not allowing gun shops for obvious reasons. And then the other question I had was around, I noticed that there were no food services with alcohol allowed in zones T4 and T5 in the neighborhoods, whereas there were obviously food services with alcohol allowed everywhere else under conditional zoning. And I'm wondering if the city, if we may consider allowing restaurants to serve alcohol in those zones with special permits. I just don't think that restaurants that don't serve alcohol are make it.
Sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting myself. Yeah, I mean, I think we currently do allow restaurants alcohol service with a legitimate restaurant use. Where we are requiring use permits are situations where there is no food service or where it becomes a predominant type of use.
Yeah, you might want to check page 279, because there's a section that says food service establishments with alcohol sales. And then for those zones that I mentioned, T4, T5 neighborhoods, it says not allowed. So.
I can maybe
add
some input there. Yeah, that's specifically in the T4N zones and the T5N zones. And you can see on the map that T4N is really around in sort of the upper and lower portions of the West End along 5th Avenue and the 2nd Street corridor. And the T5N is sort of really focused around sort of the BioMarin area in the southeast portion of the plan. as well as in the Irwin corridor on the east side of the freeway. And that generally, those zones are generally sort of set up to be sort of a lesser shade of mixed use, if that makes sense, where we would assume, you know, maybe some degree of intensity with regards to daytime uses, residential, office, other things, but not that, but sort of limit or try to sort of focus the nighttime presence along the 4th Street corridor to some degree. So that was sort of the thinking behind that. There's, to Allie's point, there's certainly different ways that that actually could be considered.
We can take a look at that. I think the other piece of that is what you don't see here is in what we did see in the standard municipal code was there were specific categories that identified the type of use, and we're kind of in a way doing away with that and really focusing more on form. And so what you would have seen in the standard municipal code would have been something like, you know, this designation is residential office, and for that reason it would not be, you know, conducive to a alcohol serving type of a district. And so I think the translation with this Transect version is, I mean, what Opticals try to do is just, you know, bring forward those types of limitations because of their location. But again, we can take a look at those specific sites and evaluate whether there's a need for some changes.
Yeah, and I would like to add a couple of things. Alcohol sales, some of this is carryover from our current code and goes back to some historic ways of how alcohol sales were regulated years ago, proximity to schools, proximity to residential districts, the different level of alcohol sales, whether it's a primary use like a liquor store versus a secondary use or supportive use like selling wine or beer as part of a restaurant operation. And there's another agency involved in this as well, the Alcohol Beverage Control, and they're the ones that actually issue the alcohol licenses. But it's one of those things I think we'll look at as follow-up to this meeting, because some of those things have changed over time and are worth revisiting. So thank you for the comment.
Yeah, and I'd like to second his comment. And, you know, in reference to the exact zones that we're discussing, Paul and Stefan both, there are like these pocket breweries and there are small restaurants that have like really alcohol forward business models. And I think the type of use that we're trying to dissuade may not be part of that. And, you know, especially in the West End, like you see the West End Festival, they close off the street, they put a bar on the street. You know, the way that we're using these spaces and creating community activation is, I'm not saying that we have to do it via alcohol use, but I think that it's not like, I don't feel like there's unsavory activity around those, you know, what's happening there. And I personally see a very, see a pretty stark difference. Like when I first moved to Marin in 2008, you know, going to downtown San Anselmo, they used to have like a creekside event in the summers, or even in San Rafael, there was events where people would bring picnics and be drinking alcohol in public, and you know, the police are walking around and they're handing out stickers to the kids. It's like super confused, like what is going on? You know, like nobody's like hiding their alcohol, or people aren't like discouraged to do that. But I think there's a culture, at least what I've observed in San Anselmo and San Rafael, where some of these community events, there's like an understanding that like just having like moderate alcohol consumption that's not like getting unruly is kind of just unspokenly tolerated. And I don't know how we account for that in the code or in the laws. I mean, we have to have those laws in place. So if things go south, you know, we can enforce, you know, certain rules. But it seems like exactly what you're saying, Paul, is that maybe some of the wording is out of date and the lens that we're using is out of date, and we just have to figure out how to get up to speed without without compromising like public safety and you know, encouraging certain activities.
And we are going from a conventional zoning district with some very old land use classifications. And I'm old enough to remember when 4th Street had a lot of bars. And that was pretty common on many main streets in Marin County and elsewhere. And you don't see that anymore. So, by the way, special events are usually not typically something that we regulate by use.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's usually a temporary permit that they get through ABC, Alcoholic Beverage Control, for like a street event or something like that. What this code addresses is really a permanent use in a building. So, but yeah, I think your point's well taken. We just need to bridge that gap between old and new. So,
Great comment.
Just a couple more. And by the way, I did find gun shop finally in the table here on page 279 between grocery store and kiosk. So alphabetical order. The next one was, you know, this is like a very specific question. Actually, I'll combine these two questions. So I noticed in T4 Main Street, T5 Neighborhood, and T5 Main Street, the minimum setback is 0. And also, you know, those buildings didn't require any space in between them either. And there were no light wells required. And I was wondering if you could talk about how that's acceptable, I guess, for lack of a better term, what the thinking is behind that.
I think Stefan is in the middle of switching computers, but I can just really quickly, oh, there he is.
Yeah.
Stefan, are you able to?
Did you hear those questions?
I can just begin and then maybe he can join in. So currently the development standards provide for 0 lot lines. And the point of that is that we have, you know, we want development, in a commercial development, you want to be able to maximize your floor space. Right now, when you go through downtown, buildings are for the most part attached. That did change. There were some properties, I think along 3rd and 2nd Street, where that setback has been implemented. Stefan, I don't know if you want to provide some information about just kind of the purpose in terms of the form-based code and how the difference between having those setbacks versus not having those setbacks between in the commercial districts.
Sure. One of the things that the two, and my apologies for disappearing for a moment. My kids are going to bed, so I needed to move to another room. The intent behind the sort of Main Street districts is that you are trying to sort of perpetuate what the plan and code refer to as sort of the block form of the zone. And this is sort of a situation where buildings along the side property lines are built adjacent to each other, and that they sort of together form a cohesive street wall. And so the sort of little or no side setbacks, and in some situations is meant to sort of emulate the existing pattern that you see where the commercial buildings are built to the full confines of the property line. What this likely means in the terms of mixed use buildings is that the ground floor, or sort of the podium portion of the building, might actually be in that 0 lot line condition. But upper floors, particularly if they are residential, the building code would actually require them to be set back in order to provide access and light from the side property line. So depending on sort of the uses and the configuration of the buildings, you would see some sort of stepping in established. But the idea behind sort of that kind of block form character is absolutely something that you see in many downtown districts, and something that's sort of emulated in the standards in those Main Street environments.
Great.
Just to sort of clarify too, that the neighborhood districts are generally providing or promoting what the code and plan refers to as house form character, where the buildings are articulated on individual parcels, and they're with the presence of side yards, and that the zoning standards, and particularly in a T4N and a T5N, are meant to sort of emulate and perpetuate that condition.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, and thank you for that explanation. Could you focus just a bit more on how the zero setback from the front will essentially not prevent a transition that may be unsightly, like a blockiness or walls or whatnot? What sort of requirements are required for frontages associated with zero setback buildings?
Sure. Generally, like, I think if we take a look at the T4MS, for example, which of course is applicable to large portions of 4th Street, for the front setback, it establishes a facade zone between 0 and 10 feet. And what the facade zone does is it basically says that the front face of your building needs to be placed within that range. But there is some flexibility there that can provide for a more dynamic streetscape. One thing to think about, for example, is that a lot of buildings that have a pattern of bay windows at the upper floor, they often have a sort of a few additional feet at the ground floor to provide that for that sort of in and out to occur at the building facade. And we often may not even realize it, because at the ground plane, the sidewalk appears as if it is, we don't see the boundary between public and private in that situation. But providing the applicant with some flexibility of sort of designing the front facade within that zone, we usually get a better building. It means that the building can step in at storefronts where you actually might have doors, or people entering and exiting buildings. It means that, elements at the above floors, bay windows and balconies, other encroachments can come in and out of the building sort of within that zone. And it also means that you can sort of establish through the use of frontages, sort of different ways of publicly transitioning to spaces on the inside. It could be, a storefront, for example, that is very close to the sidewalk. Other buildings might have more of like a dooryard transition, where you have sort of a semi-public or semi-private space between the front face of the building and the back of the sidewalk. So that again is sort of something where we're looking to emulate an existing pattern. If you walk along the street in downtown Santa Fe, particularly sort of at the entrances to buildings, there actually is a lot of modulation. It's not sort of a hard line that's established along the back of the sidewalk. And the establishment of that facade zone intends to continue that pattern.
Okay. Last detailed question for me. Thank you for that response, by the way. I noticed in one of Tony's videos that arcades were mentioned, but the arcade is not included in the form-based code. I was wondering if that was intentional and what the decision was behind that, or why that decision was made. But okay.
Yeah, thanks for that, Commissioner Profanity. So arcades are generally a condition where we cover the sidewalk, with an arcaded structure, that it's a condition where we allow the building above the sidewalk to basically build out. And it creates a condition where there is potentially an encroachment that occurs above the sidewalk, or sort of a portion of the public right-of-way with new building. And that generally sort of was seen as something that sort of wouldn't be appropriate within downtown Center Fel. It's a pattern that you do see in some cities on the West Coast, but it's not one that you basically see much in the Bay Area. There are provisions in the MS zones for a gallery, and that actually is a situation where you would build out over the sidewalk, but you wouldn't have an additional encroachment on the floors up above the gallery. And that is something that we particularly see in a lot of cities on the West Coast. And that seemed to be sort of a more appropriate response than sort of the traditional arcade frontage.
You just can't tell Public Works. Public Works, not a fan of the overhang from experience.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking that the arcade might be appropriate for us because of our desire to have more density, but I can understand how it's problematic. Great, thank you. Those are all my questions. I appreciate your patience, everyone's patience.
It seems like we have a lull here. Are there any other final comments, questions, or points of consideration?
I would just add, this is Commissioner Mercado, that I have a hard time visualizing how this gets implemented. And Stefan, I know at the end you said you had applied it to a couple of existing projects. One thought for the kind of roundup for the final one, or as this gets finalized, is to provide us a little more context, maybe give an example or just show one project, spend a couple of minutes just analyzing it, maybe take one site and look at it, one or two of the zones, and just kind of apply it quickly. Because honestly, the biggest issue for me is this is so different than your standard zoning code or whatever that I'm used to. It's hard, even though this is intended to be a visual representation, I have a hard time actually seeing it apply. I just kind of see a drawing, I see limitations, but I don't really know how to interpret that per se. So I just feel like it would help to have one or two maybe easy examples just to kind of show us. That would be great.
The library could be one of them.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Sure. Otherwise, I think it's great. I have no other comments tonight. And thanks for the patience. Sorry with the internet.
It happens. All right. So is that the tail end of our comments? All right, if so, I'm going to request a motion to accept the report and continue the meeting to February 9th, 2021 and provide feedback at that time. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve and reconvene on February 9th, or continue on February 9th. Not approve, accept the report. I apologize. I'll make a motion to accept the report and continue on February 9th.
And I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further discussion on that? Okay, if not, I'm going to move to a roll call. Staff.
If we get like examples of how to look at, like a real quick study of how to interpret the code, I think Chairman Mercado, or not Commissioner Mercado, made a great example. Is that something that Opticos could provide in that time frame, or is that something that would come later?
Well, there's a couple of things if I can just comment on that. We are, Opticos is working on a video that will be provided online for our community members to inspect, and I'll let you know when that is up. I mean, separately, I think, when we come back, maybe we can do a brief kind of summarized version of that video. But yeah, we do have something that's being worked on right now that will be available to the public.
Great, thank you, Ellie.
All right, given the motion and the second, Ally, could we go with roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Davidson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lubomirski,
Yes.
Commissioner Mercado,
Yes.
Commissioner Saudi,
Yes.
Vice Chair Privatali,
Yes.
and Chair Samuzzi.
Yes. And I guess for former Commissioner Hill, it's not an abstention. We just go with a 6 vote.
Correct.
Okay, cool. All right, now we'll move on to our director's report.
Okay, so I have just a few items just for the next meeting. As we were just mentioned, we have the kind of the wrap up on the downtown precise plan, and that is scheduled for February 9th. On that night, we also will have a development application, a request to do a study session on a property at 160 Mitchell, and this is a request to allow for conversion of an existing office space to be used for residential, and that will require a zoning amendment. So the applicant is requesting to come back to you, come before you for an introduction and some feedback. And then later in February, we're going to have an ADU ordinance that is going to be presented to you, a draft version. The draft version is actually available online, available for input, and there is an opportunity to provide comment. And so we welcome any comments either the commissioners or community members might have. But that draft ordinance will be presented to you end of February 23rd. And I don't have anything else to add. I do want to congratulate Councilmember Hill. As Commissioner Lubomirski mentioned, he has been appointed tonight, and he will now be joining the rest of the council members, and we will have a vacancy on the commission. So we will be looking at getting that one filled, that vacancy filled. Paul, I don't know if there's anything you would like to add.
Can I just add something while we're waiting for that? And that's just to say that we, in response to some of the feedback we got at the last commission meeting, we are doing some focused outreach related to historic preservation. And we'll be working with property owners, with the chamber, with the downtown bid, and with San Rafael Heritage to continue that discussion of what the downtown survey, the historic survey found, and how we can better explain and respond to some of the concerns that we're hearing. So I just wanted to let the commission know, and also the public and anyone who's watching this, that we're working on some focused outreach related to that information.
Yeah, in fact, that's exactly what I was going to report to the commission on that particular topic. The one other thing I want to mention is we are, as part of that effort, we're probably going to have some informational webinars so that property owners can sign up for a specific date or time to participate in those webinars, to walk through the historic resource information and the recommendations. So no, I had nothing else, but thanks for bringing it up, Barry.
Sure.
All right. Do we have any communication from any commission members?
I don't have any communication, but Ali, so all the people on the now semi-defunct DRB, would they be allowed, I mean, would they be encouraged to maybe join us?
Typically the applications, there's a call for application submittal, and the interviews are held by the city council, a team of, I don't know if it's the entire city council, but there's an application. But yeah, absolutely, anyone who is on the DRB. And just to be clear, the DRB is still an active membership. So once we are informed that everyone's safe from COVID and we can reconvene, we'll be looking to them. But yeah, anybody that's currently serving on a board is welcome and encouraged to apply.
Thank you.
Allie, in terms of COVID, is there a tier that we hit when we convene back in person?
No, I'm not sure when we actually will convene. I think once we are actually in a safe zone, I think there's still going to be a time lag where we're going to continue to meet remotely. And I don't know that anybody really knows what that will look like. For now, there's no defined date.
Okay, I just was wondering if it was tied to a tier.
Once Paul gets vaccinated, I'll be. No.
Well, I'm
You
probably
too.
the one that's
You too.
I'm probably the one that's closest to 75, so I should probably get a vaccination fairly quickly here. And yes, I think that's a really good question because I have no clue on at what tier we are allowed to convene as a group in a public forum. And but it's, you know, it's going to be a while. That's all I know. We're still kind of like scratching on the surface with purple. So, or tier 2.
I know. Well, the schools, you know,
Right.
The wheels are moving on that, but that's a CDC recommendation, so it's a little different.
Mhm.
So Allie, we signed up for, I know we took months with the DRB, correct? And is that going to be kind of liaison work as needed? Maybe this is a follow-up on Mark's question.
Yeah, so if in the event that we have the DRB convenes as a full board,
Yeah.
we would then be
Okay.
asking. I mean, the idea was that if we ended up, because, you know, two scenarios could be, one, we are able to convene in person, or the DRB is able to convene in person, and then we would be asking for the liaisons to participate. Another scenario could be that we establish a process where we begin using our boards and doing this type of a meeting. So we haven't gotten to that point, but if that does occur, we would be looking for a liaison for that as well.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it. And I just
Al,
want to
yeah,
Go
go ahead.
ahead.
I'm sorry.
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to
Finish on
mention that, Allie, you might want to note that we do intend on having a full DRB meeting in February to review the DRB pilot program. And then they're also going to be asked to review, I believe, another project. I'm not sure.
Right. Thank you. I forgot to mention that. Thank you.
Got it. My last one was props to Council Member Hill now.
Yeah.
For stepping up. That's super exciting for him and for the city. He's great.
Yeah.
So announcements for the vacancy will go out at some point in the next few months, Allie?
Yeah, usually
Okay.
they are released by our city clerk. So
Okay.
All right. Any other comments? Seeing none, this meeting is now adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
good
Good
night.
night.